Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Well, today we'll be talking about where all the flowers gone, mainly talking about flowering shrubs and really focusing in on hydrangeas. My title came from, it seems like when I do something like this, there'll be certain phrases that come from songs that I can remember, and that's where this one came from, Where Have All the Flowers Gone? I think it was an old folk song back in the 60s. I believe it was, sort of telling my age, but I will say I was a kid then. But that's where that came from. So we'll just go ahead and get started. So what's going on? And failure to bloom, as far as our flowering shrubs go, can be caused by several things. And we're just going to take a quick overview of this. This gentleman here is talking to his violet, and it says, you think the failure to bloom could be caused not just by improper location, but also by having the fear of having your blooms compared to those of other African violets. Well, location is one of them. So to start off with, if your shrub's not blooming, a flowering shrub in general, it could be it's just too young. Plants do have a certain maturity level. They must be physiologically mature to be able to bloom. So it may be that maybe they're just not ready to bloom yet. They need to grow a little more. Or if you've transplanted a shrub, and I know sometimes this is also true with things like, I don't really consider it a shrub, but like peonies, or however you choose to pronounce that. If you transplant those, so you might go a year before they can actually get back up and start producing blooms again. So it may be that you transplanted something. Also, it could be that those buds, the flower buds, have been nipped in the bud by some winter temperatures, because flower buds can be less hardy than the leaf buds, the buds that produce leaves. There are two different types of buds on our shrubs. So we'll have flower buds and the leaf buds. Also, let's say you have early blooming plants and their buds are fully formed and they're ready to go and start blooming. And then we get hit by a late frost or a freeze. That could do damage to them, and that'll cause non-blooming. Also, it could be too much of a good thing, or maybe not enough of a good thing. Actually, too much fertilizer. A lot of people think if you fertilize, that's what everything needs. But actually, excessive nitrogen fertilizer will cause vegetative growth, those leaf buds, over the flower bud production. So, you might want to check your fertilization if it's not blooming and you're getting abundance of dark green, healthy leaves, or healthy looking to you leaves. But a way to help that is to always get your soil sampled if you're in doubt about whether your plants, your landscape, your lawn, whatever, your garden needs to have fertilizer added. And you can do that at your local extension office. Also, it could be that you're not receiving, or your plant's not receiving, the necessary nutrients like N, P, and K, and that can cause non-blooming, but it also can cause other different types of problems for your plant. So that could be a problem. Also, with blooming plants, it could be the sunlight. Most flowering trees and shrubs need at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight. Now, we will learn once we get into the hydrangeas that they do prefer some shade, and especially it depends on where you might have them located. They may take a little more shade than not, and maybe morning sun, but no afternoon sun, and that sort of thing. So those are things you have to just pay attention to. But even those plants that are shade bloomers, or can tolerate the shade or prefer shade, if they're in really heavy shade, they will bloom poorly too. So you might want to check how much light your plant gets. Now, the big thing, the one we're going to talk about today, is just plain old bad timing. Whether or not your plant, flowering shrub, blooms is dependent on when you prune. Because when you prune, what time of year it it could lead to you cutting off some of those flower buds. And if the flower buds are absent, then there, of course, there's not going to be any blooming going on. So how do you know? Well, the correct thing to do is prune your flowering shrubs, or pruning them depends on when they produce those flower buds. Okay, I had to add this. It's like pruning. When you talk about pruning with folks, either it strikes fear in everybody's heart. They're afraid to prune. And this little cartoon shows where I think a group of folks who are to take care of the churchyard, and you can see one timid pruner. They have before and then after, and you really can't tell that they've pruned. So, probably did no good. So either you get the timid pruners, or you just can't stop yourself. And early on, well, I used to, I'm better at this, but I used to be within this category of where you just can't stop yourself. Once you get going, it's like, oh, it looks so good. And then you just, well, what about this? Well, if I took that off, I need to take that. So, that could lead to some problems. And I know this is corny, but in flowering shrubs, it's all about bud production. And what is going to follow from here, it's like, this bud is for you. So the general rule of thumb, and we all know general rule of thumb sometimes don't always follow through, and this may be the case with some of our hydrangeas, but this is a good place to start. The general rule of thumb for shrub blooming, that sort of thing. If you have spring blooming shrubs, and we're talking about early spring, let's think about like your forsythias and things like that, they bloom on old wood. So that is wood that was formed the previous summer. And the process of producing next year's flower buds has started right after they finish their blooming period in early spring. So that would stand to reason that the best time to prune your very early spring flowering shrubs would be right after they bloom, because this allows, right, if you prune it right after they bloom, then this allows the maximum time before winter starts and it goes dormant for the wood to grow and for those flower buds to develop. So a good rule of thumb, if we're looking, now remember, hard and fast rules aren't always the case, but if you're looking for a rule, you want to prune your spring bloomers as soon after it blooms in the springs, but try to make sure that you have them pruned before June the 1st. Now, shrubs that are considered spring bloomers, of course, we've got rhododendrons, forsythia, mock orange, nine-bark quince, spring flowering roses, spring blooming spirea, lilacs, and some of our viburnums. So those will all bloom, and especially like forsythia, I always think of it. It blooms very early in the spring. And then forsythia, if it gets out of hand, which it can, I've got one right now that just sort of got out of hand and I sort of missed my window of opportunity, but it's still going to get a little haircut. Right after it blooms is the best time, and those blooms start to fade, is the best time to start going ahead and trimming it back a little bit. Now, our summer blooming shrubs, they bloom on new wood. So they will be blooming on new wood that is forming actually during the current spring or summer, just before they bloom. So they form the flower buds on new wood once the plant comes out of dormancy in the spring. As soon as it warms up and the plant comes out of dormancy, then that's when it starts to produce new wood or new stems, new stem growth. And along with that, those flower buds will be produced along with that. Now, it should be pruned while the plant is dormant. I read, and I've got a little red asterisk there. And the reason is because I read some things on hydrangea, and then also on flowering shrubs in general. Now for flowering and shrubs in general, usually it said prune them like in late winter, which would be like February, March around here, or very early spring. And so that way you're thinking, okay, I'm catching it before the shrub is breaking dormancy and before any new growth starts. Now, with some of the hydrangeas that I was looking at, it said prune them in late fall. Well, I have a problem with that one just because, especially here in Kentucky, sometimes we never know what type of fall we're going to have. We can go into late fall and it still have days where it warms up. And as we know, if you wait to your shrubs, any kind of shrub, if you're pruning it, in late summer or midsummer into late summer and fall, you're setting it up for failure, because pruning will stimulate new growth. And so you've got that fresh new growth going into fall and then into winter and freezing. And this new growth is very susceptible, of course, to damage, freeze damage, which then further can put the plant under stress, lead to disease and that sort of thing. So when I read that, I think we should just hold off on that. And I say, as a rule of thumb, just wait until the plant goes dormant. So the rule of thumb is if it flowers after June the 1st, then you want to prune it late. Well, it says later in the summer and fall. You can prune it right after it blooms, like June the 1st, but if not, then I would just wait until it goes dormant. And then especially true with our hydrangeas, which just don't bloom for a little bit, and then that's it. Their blooms can stay and will stay with us and continue to bloom throughout summer and maybe into fall. So examples of some of our summer flowering shrubs are butterfly bush, beautyberry, clematis, buttonbush, some of our hydrangeas, the Hydrangea arborescens, Hydrangea paniculata, and even the oak leaf hydrangea. Although, now that says, that was in one of, I believe, the UK, and that could be true with rebloomers. Some of our oak leaves can be rebloomers, but also oak leaf is considered to bloom on old wood, I believe, as well. So, okay, let's really focus in on our hydrangea. Any blooming shrubs, and this is hydrangea included, if any pruning is needed to be done, the only pruning really you probably need is to cut out dead or diseased branches and maybe the dried blossoms if needed. You can remove selected stems entirely, encourage new growth from the base. You can see from our picture there that the light colored, the white stems are the ones that we're removing, and we go all the way to the base. This encourages new growth, but it also helps to improve the health and the habit. So you're not just cutting at the outer edges and that sort of thing. This is the best type of pruning that probably any type of flowering shrub will need, and nothing else. It's just to go in and cut out dead and diseased. And then occasionally you may want to go in there and do some pruning where you take out some rogues or something like that. And this will reinvigorate it and encourage new growth from the base. Now let's focus on our hydrangeas. Let's know what we grow is the big thing, because the best thing to do for the most part is just to let your hydrangea grow, and really you don't need any type of pruning. You just let it grow, maybe prune it occasionally to prune out some dead or diseased branches or something like that, but just let it grow. But So let's take a look at our hydrangeas here. There are 5 that are the main ones here in North America. We have the big leaf, the oak leaf, the mountain, the panicle, and the smooth. And some form flower buds on old wood and some on new wood. But even now, they confused it just a little bit more for folks because they've introduced rebloomers, those that bloom on old wood, but also bloom on new wood. So for hydrangeas, if they bloom on old wood, you want to prune them only if needed. Just as I said, prune them only if needed, if they're blooming on old wood. Because of the lasting blooms, remember, throughout the summer, late summer, and even into fall, if you went by that and pruned them, you know, like in late fall or whatever, you run the chance of invigorating growth before you're going into that winter time. So the best time to prune it, if you really had to, if you felt like you needed to, was when, excuse me, you may not have enough time to regrow and form flower buds for the next year. So in this case, just avoid pruning this type of hydrangea except to remove any dead. Well, we've already talked about that. Okay, our big leaf hydrangea blooms on old wood. Now this is Hydrangea macrophylla. I've added some information here, and this is mainly for you all who like to go ahead and get the slides. This has a lot of information on here just about the culture of the macrophyllas. They're one of the most popular landscape shrubs. They're probably the ones, when you think of hydrangeas, that maybe you see the most. They do have the flowers that will respond to either acidic or alkaline soils, you know, to change the colors. They bloom during the late spring and summer on the previous year's growth, which is old wood. They can generally be pest-free. They do suffer for some leaf spot and that sort of thing, powdery mildew when they're under stress, but new cultivars are bred to bloom on both old and new wood. They are very cold or considered cold hardy because winter damage, and also they are, you can sort of depend on them to bloom because winter weather can damage the hydrangea buds if they're there during the developing, during, or have developed and are there during the time when the plant is dormant. But because these the hydrangeas bud due to low temperatures, the cold spring temperatures can, or late freeze events can also result in delayed or damaged spring growth, but they are one of the more cold hardy type of plant. Cooler summer temperatures can also reduce blooms or delay blooming, and then drought. Most of the hydrangeas like moist or a moisture type of soil. So any type of drought can affect the flowering. So here we have our macrophylla. And you can see this picture was taken in October, and I've got a little blow up there, and there you can see, and I thought this was important because for us to know, well, when to bloom and or when to prune and when not to prune, and you don't have a stack of notes there with you to say, okay, now what was it? You know what to look for. So here, this picture was taken in October, and you can see with that little circle there that the flower buds have already started to form there at the leaf axils. So you can see that. I believe that top bud you see there looks like a leaf bud to me, but those side ones there lower down are flower buds. Okay, our oak leaf hydrangea, Hydrangea quercifolia, blooms on old wood. A lot of times you will see these mainly in white. This just happens to be, this picture is one, the cultivar is called Ruby Slippers. It's called oak leaf or quercifolia because, as you can see, those big leaves that a lot of people like, they do resemble oak leaves. Now this can get quite tall. It has, the blooms are pyramidal shape. This likes medium moisture, well-drained organic soils. So you probably need to mulch it to help retain soil moisture. It can take full sun to part shade. It needs some sun to bloom. You probably want to put this in a sheltered location to give it some winter protection because it can lose significant number of flower buds during harsh winters. It has some susceptibility to leaf blight and powdery mildew. Aphids and spider mites can be problems occasionally. And then for some folks, deer like this plant as well. So, you know, if you live in one of those areas where the deer like to visit your landscape, this might not be the plant for you. But here, these quercifolias are usually the first to bloom in early summer. They typically don't rebloom, but, you know, give people time enough, they may come up with a reblooming oak leaf hydrangea, and they set their flowers on old wood. So you can see here, this picture was taken in October. Another, I think, attractive point to the oak leaf hydrangea is that the stems are sort of like a cinnamon color and maybe a little rough or have a rough look to them, but that can be quite attractive sometimes in winter once the leaves go away. But you can see in the axils, those are what the buds would look like, the flower buds that you were looking for right there. In the sides I've used. Okay, our mountain hydrangea, which is Hydrangea serrata, it blooms on old wood. It is one of those that has like the lace cap, what they consider a lace cap hydrangea. It has those flattened flower heads. It was previously listed as Hydrangea macrophylla lace cap, but they've decided that it actually deserves its own categorization. Different things about this plant that make it so, because it's a little more hardier than the macrophyllas. It's smaller. The leaves are even a little smaller than that. But you'll see that the flowers have clusters of small florets with larger showier florets on the outside. Some cultivars will have that mop head form. The flowers also respond to the soil pH, so you can play with that in getting blue to pink there if you'd like. You want to prune in the spring after blooming if needed, only if needed. It needs to be grown in sun to partial shade. It prefers cool growing conditions because this is a mountain hydrangea, as the name, you can, from that name, you see that it probably grew in the mountains where it had most shade, more cooler temperatures. In warmer climates, or say, you know, in your own landscape, a particular microclimate where you're thinking about putting it, it really needs to be protected from hot sun. It will keep the foliage and flowers from fading and scorching. It will flower with consistent summer watering. So this one does not appreciate a drought. It can be susceptible to powdery mildew. It can be susceptible to bud blight and some wilts and occasionally aphids. And here on the serrata, you can see this is also taken in October, and you can see what the buds look like there. So in all of these, even though the bud, you know, they may take slightly different shapes and everything, but you can see that they form little buds at the leaf axil. So the leaf buds would be below them, and then the little buds come out between the leaf axils. Now the reblooming hydrangeas, they've thrown, they throw a little clinker into any kind of rule of thumb you might have, because they produce flowers on both old and new wood. So if you prune, you probably will sacrifice flowers somewhere. But to avoid losing the most buds, I guess, you should treat them as old wood bloomers, but only prune them, say, if you need to prune out dead branches and that sort of thing. That's really the only pruning that rebloomers and any type of hydrangea should be subjected to. Reblooming varieties, we have the big leaf varieties, the macrophyllas, and also the mountain hydrangeas. They will have some reblooming varieties. Okay, so now we're going to go on to those hydrangeas that bloom on our new wood. They start on that new wood just as they come out of dormancy in the spring, and as the plants start to grow, then they will the buds will begin to grow as well. Now this shows again that if you really have to, that you may want to just take off evenly on different little branches along the tops. You never want to take off more, any type of plant, shrub. You never want to take off more than 25 to 30% of any, and I usually try to stick to 25% of any of their branches. As far as for shrubs, if you take off any more than that, it takes away the framework of the plant, for one thing, that helps keep it standing upright in good form. And then also with any plant, they need that foliage, at least 75%, I would say, to have the leaves to be able to produce adequate amounts of food and to support the root system and produce the food and nutrients that the plant needs to grow and survive. So, as always, when in doubt, the best thing to do is don't prune. If you think, oh, should I really prune that? No, don't prune. Now, if you do see dead, or maybe something that looks like it's diseased and wilting or something like that, then yes, by all means, go in there and prune them. But remember this, no hydrangea requires pruning to grow and bloom well. So those that bloom on, I believe this is our new wood, are panicle hydrangeas, Hydrangea panicula. Also, paniculatas might be good for city areas. I see some of these in places like fast food places. There's a place here in Georgetown, Starbucks, that has one of these. And because they're air pollution tolerant, they thrive in urban conditions. They're also more drought tolerant. So if you've got an area that needs a sturdy little hydrangea, you may want to consider the paniculatas. They will bloom from July to September, and that's usually a time when other plants are starting to fade in our landscape. They do have yellow fall color. They can be grouped together as hedges and that sort of thing. These are ones that prefer morning sun and afternoon shade. Now, they are shallow rooted, so you will want to consider, or for them to be able to thrive, not only placing them in the right areas, but also putting at least 3 to 4 inches of compost or mulch on to hold in that moisture. Aphids and mites can come on these plants, but they're rarely a problem. They can be susceptible to leaf spot and rust and mildew, but generally those plants that are, if it's a healthy plant placed in the right area, these problems are less. It's only the stress plants that will exhibit this. Now they are susceptible to deer damage. Deer seem to like them. And they do have brittle stems, so they are damaged by, like strong winds or something like that. So you might want to consider that when placing them. Now the paniculata blooms on new wood, and here we're showing this paniculata. This is in October. You can see that the yellow coloring coming out on the leaves, but you can also see there at the leaf axils, you really don't see any type of buds starting to take place. So when you see something like that on one of your hydrangeas, say in October and going into November, you would say, okay, this one blooms on new wood. And so, it will start producing its buds in early spring. Another one that blooms on new wood is our smooth hydrangeas, Hydrangea arborescens. I think this is the one. This is the one like the snowball, what you would call maybe the snowball. It's a wild hydrangea. Its native area is moist and rocky wooded slopes, stream banks, that sort of thing. It is very cold hardy, but it will grow in warmer climates. It likes your average medium moisture, but well-drained soils. It does not take drought very well. And if it is in a drought or in a place where it's not getting the proper watering, you will notice that the foliage will become stressed and the plant will really start to decline. It needs part shade, and it will only tolerate full sun if it has consistent moisture, which in the landscape sometimes is a hard combination to produce. You can prune this back close to the ground in late winter to encourage vigorous growth. The flower color, this is one that will be just white. It's not affected by soil pH. It can be susceptible to bud blight, wilt, spots, and again, those aphids, mites, even scale and nematodes may be a problem or can be a problem. Again, with the smooth, you can see here, this was taken in October, and even more so, you can see there are no buds there on these plants. Now, with this one, it can rebloom if the growing season is long enough. And I know here in Kentucky, sometimes we have like an extended fall or whatever. So, you may see a little reblooming, but reblooming varieties will flower on new growth a second time that same season. Okay, now, if you really want the information on pruning techniques, any type of tools, all of that, you can find it here in HO 59. I've got the link there that you can link onto. This is one of it's an old UK publication, but it has good information in it, still viable, good information that may be useful to you if you want to go into, if you really want to know all about pruning. But I think a good takeaway from this is that really your hydrangeas, if you leave them alone, you really don't need to prune them. Now, the big thing I haven't mentioned is that if you think you need to prune them and they're outgrowing their spot, it's not the plant and pruning that's the problem. It's that you've got the wrong plant in the wrong spot. So always when you're thinking about adding additions to your landscape, always make sure you have the right plant for the right place. So, it's a common misconception, I think. It says here that hydrangeas, you can prune them, to keep them shorter. And I do know that this one little hydrangea grouping there at the Starbucks, oh, they cut that back and prune that thing just constantly because it's right next to a drive-through. So while it's a beautiful plant, it's probably not the best there as far as having to continually pruning it. But what you want to look for is the right plant for the right spot. So if you've got something like that, say a hydrangea or any other shrub that you're constantly have to cut back and cut back and cut back, you might want to consider digging that shrub up and transplanting it to a new spot where it's better suited, and then consider looking into other flowering shrubs that will fit more within the space that you have in your landscape. Now, in doing this and researching this, excuse me, in researching this, I came across the Proven Winners website, and they have an extensive information about hydrangeas, and I think they are one of the leaders in producing different types of hydrangeas, but I've got that link up there. But they have hydrangea comparison charts, and they go into sizes of all of the hydrangeas, and you can see there just a little bit that I have there, but also hardiness, whether they bloom on new or old wood, just about everything you want to know about all available hydrangeas in the US right now is on this site. So, if you're interested in that, or you're thinking about adding some hydrangeas to your home or an area where you are, you may want to consider looking at this. It's a really good resource. Now, I was telling Faye early on before we got started, last year I had actually planted a macrophylla out, someone had given me, and I sort of forgotten about it, and it died back. I'd really forgotten about it. It's sort of over a little ravine where, it's been a busy spring. I haven't really been out there in my garden, probably checking like I should. But the other night I was out there walking around and I looked, and there it is. So this is my macrophylla. It happens to be a rebloomer, though. It's one of those new, I think this is called Endless Summer. And I believe that is because it's supposed to be a rebloomer, but also because of the striking colors here on the blooms. And that's what caught my attention. I caught some kind of little flame hot pink color there, and I'm like, what is that? And then I found it. But I will show you, or you can see, I left some of the dead stems from last summer on it. You can see those have died back. So this little macrophylla actually came totally back from the ground up. This is all on new wood here. And then this was just a picture of, I went and found the little tag that I had for it, and it's an endless summer, and it's one of those rebloomers that they have. Here's all the resources that I used. I tried to add links to any of those, and that's it.